think we have a leadership crisis that is happening in the world. I don't think that's a secret to anybody, right? And I think the crisis is pretty clearly a lack of conscience in leadership. We have created a reward system in our culture that promotes people who can lead without conscience. Hi, and welcome to Inside Conscience-Driven Leadership, a podcast where we are talking about how conscience influences leaders and what intuition has to do with it. And yeah, just generally talking about this kind of cool style of leadership. I'm here with my co-host, Julie Euber.
Hi there.
Today, I think we're here to talk about why conscience-driven leadership. Where did this come from? Why today, right now, is it making its way into the world?
Why don't we start with where it comes from? I know in our first episode you talked a little bit about your past, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit on where this came from for you and why you felt it important for this to be brought into the world at this moment.
The biggest thing for me about conscience-driven leadership is I don't feel like it's a thing I am making up, right? This is not Hannah Miller's guide to leadership. It's a kind of leadership that I see in the world. It's right. It's the way that I led when I was leading a circus, but it's also the way my clients as a coach lead. And the first person that I met who led like this, that I saw this recognition is I had just moved to Tucson. I had been asked to join the board of an independent school. Oddly, it was my grandmother had been involved. And so they invited me to join after she died. And the leader of the school, her name is Julie Sherrill, was just the most badass leader I had ever met. And I wound up staying on her board for like a decade, not because I love independent schools, because I wanted to be on Julie's side. It was like, whatever she's doing, I'm here for it. And working with her wound up inspiring me to become a leadership coach and consultant and go get a master's in leadership and organizational development and certification as a coach, because I was like, I want my job to be supporting people like her. It's great that I can volunteer and do it, but if she exists, that means I'm not alone, and that means there's more of us. And I want to go out there and find these leaders and be on their side, because it is a lonely kind of way to lead. This conscience-driven leadership is just a lonely. All leadership is lonely, but I think conscience-driven leaders are even lonelier because they're acting from this internal motivation to make systems that serve people better. And that's not always widely understood, right?
Yeah. And that's because it's so internally driven, it's not as much about the external pieces that people tend to latch onto a bit more and connect across, maybe.
Yeah, and like why you do it isn't always clear, or where you're going might not always be clear. And I think these leaders need more than most a collaborator and a confidant to talk through their ideas and feel which ones really land, and somebody who can just help them unpack the problems that come up in leadership, because they're called towards something. They see the possibility, they understand the obstacles between where they are and where they want to be, and they have a compulsion to act on those things, but it's hard, and we aren't taught the skills, I think, to navigate our intuition and to operate from conscience. That's just not how the world operates at this moment in time. I think it is how the world has operated in lots of different cultures throughout time, but it's not how modern Western leadership culture is organized at the moment.
Cool. So you grow up in a circus and then you meet leaders that you feel inspire you of what leadership really could be, but also you see yourself in.
Mm-hmm.
Then you get to this point where you feel like you're ready to describe it. Like, what is this? What does that point look like?
Well, I moved to Spain right about a year ago. And for lots of reasons, and we got lots of family in Europe, but also honestly, like the world was at a time I needed a change. Like it was time to move. It was time to do something different. And so we moved to Spain. We wound up living in this like coastal, it's not quite a village, it's like a resort town that nobody's ever heard of. It's great. I can walk everywhere. But the coolest thing for my business about moving to Spain is because I still work in the US, my clients start at like 4 or 5 p.m. So that means I have all day to like either do errands and life stuff, or to go sit in a cafe by the sea and think about things and type about them. And so being in Spain gave me this new spaciousness for my brain to work. And paradoxically, AI also came online, and talking to the robot about ideas. And one of my favorite ways to use the robot is to tell it to interview me, to say, I have this idea, interview me about it so that I can get the thoughts out of my head, right? Like I'm an out loud thinker, typing counts as out loud for me. And so I would just get in these like kind of like deep philosophical conversations with the robot about how I lead and trying to organize it. I was trying to do more writing for my business, and so ideas just kept bubbling up, and the themes started bubbling up. And because I had space in my schedule, I got to like really dive into what is it that these leaders have in common? How do I name it? Right? I love to name things. I think words are really important, and how we define them is important. And I don't know, it's honestly, this process has felt like midwifing something. Like I have brought something into the world that wanted to be in the world, is really what it feels like. And it's been an invitation for me to connect more with my intuition and to become more collaborative. I've been a solopreneur for like 10 years. I work with my clients and I collaborate with them, but that's different. And so it gave me an excuse to reach out to you. We've worked together for years on and off. And like, we always like had the friend vibe, but we never necessarily had an excuse to work together, which is, I think, how we both formed friendships. And so, yeah, there's just been this like letting the universe bring it, letting the universe help, right? Like, like making this podcast, I put a post on LinkedIn and said, hey guys, I want to make a podcast. Who do I know that can help? And this person that I had worked with years ago, we'd worked together kind of sporadically on a couple things over a long time, was like, well, me, I can do this. And I was like, okay, cool, let's talk. Turns out, huge synchronicity, what I'm trying to do and what she's trying to do just linked up. Same thing with like, I need somebody to help me with strategy. Who do I know that can help me with like strategy and getting the message out here? Somebody else who I'd known from a totally different part of my life was like, well, me. Turns out, and right, like every time, and as we're recording these podcasts, they're here in the audience helping us. And they're like, holy crap, you're talking about me. I was like, yeah, of course I am. Like, you raise your hand, that means you're one of us. So yeah, it's been this super organic process of just letting a thing exist that wanted to exist.
That's amazing. So, for those of you keeping track of the timeline at home, we have circus, badass leaders, finding ways to define and bring about this understanding of a leadership style you're seeing, and
Hmm.
now it's going out into the world. So,
Yeah.
what maybe what is maybe scary about that? What's exciting about that? What do you want it to do now that you're finding ways to get this out into the world?
I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm like, okay, so why did it want to come into the world right now?
Mm.
And I think we have a leadership crisis that is happening in the world. I don't think that's a secret to anybody, right? And I think the crisis is pretty clearly a lack of conscience in leadership, right? We have created a reward system in our culture that promotes people who can lead without conscience. People who can put money as the most important outcome instead of people.
Mhm.
Uh, have gained a lot of power. And that's the reason I said paradoxically about AI earlier. AI doesn't have a conscience. Our whole world has changed in a year, right? 2 years ago, AI was not a thing. Now, in the next year, in 2026, AI is going to be doing freaking everything. And there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. And, these are things that are scary. And I don't know, honestly, I feel like conscience driven leadership and me bringing it into the world is like my contribution to the resistance, right? Like, I think the world can be different, and we are responsible for taking action to help make a different world. And so, if I can create a system that supports and encourages leaders with conscience to understand and use their intuition to build systems that support people doing their best, that's my responsibility, right? Like, I can't know that it's possible for me to do that and do nothing. That's my conscience at work. That's my can't not moment of like, well, I know this could exist, so I better do the work.
Incredible. That's great to hear. And so, I think this is a hard question because I think I know the answer of, uh, the question is like, how does someone know if this system is for them? I think the answer is you just know when you are. But I'm sure for some that's an unsatisfying answer. So can I push that a bit further? And can you kind of talk about who your audience is?
Okay, so in our last episode, we really dove into like what is the definition of conscience? It's that ability to see what's possible, to see the obstacles to making that possibility happen, and then the compulsion to act to bring that to life in service of people. That there's service of systems that serve people, and how intuition is the engine of that. Is how conscience moves through the body. How do people know it's them? I mean, I think you do. If you know, you know situation. If you don't resonate with the feeling of I have to do this thing because I'm called to do it, and I don't like the fact that it's a bad idea on paper doesn't matter. That feeling of I can't not. I am called to this challenge, even though the terrain is unfamiliar, even though I don't know how I'm going to do it. If you know that feeling, you know that feeling. If you've made that decision in your life at some point to do something that seemed on paper to be a terrible idea, you left grad school, you got your JD and then decided not to practice the law, you left your family business after 20 years having no idea what you were going to do next. And the result was, holy crap, I found myself. And that was obviously the thing I needed to do. I couldn't be who I am. I couldn't have the impact on the world I want to have if I hadn't done that thing that I couldn't not do. Then you're a conscience-driven leader. Welcome to the club.
Fantastic. And then there's just the podcast itself and how that fits into all these things that you want to see for CDL. And so I think we could both talk a little bit about our hopes and interests and what this podcast could do for both the model and for those that are interested in learning more.
Yeah, I want to hear you talk a little bit. I feel like I've been monologuing.
Well, yeah, I come to this podcast very humbly. I've never done a podcast, anything like that, but I'm an avid listener, and I'm an avid friend, and that I love working with you, and I really do resonate with this leadership style. And so, I really do feel that one of the most fun you can have is when you're supporting a friend that has a project they care a lot about. And so being a part of that means a lot to me. And so I want to use this as a way to hang out with you, as a vehicle for my own learning. But also, I think this is an opportunity to create a space where people feel seen through our conversations and our explorations. And so, it's certainly possible I'll say something wrong and then I'll get to correct myself. And that'll be a good experience for me too, to do that and something that feels so real like a podcast. But I just hope that this gives other people space to think and be thoughtful about their own leadership styles as well.
Very cool. Awesome. That's just I can't even like say enough how much I appreciate your role in helping bring CDL to life because right? Like I have to talk about things in order to make sense of them. And I have my best ideas out loud. And so like, honestly, the number one reason to do this podcast was so that there's a recording of me talking through the model. And like our conversations were so fruitful. Like, right. Like I was like, hey, I have this thing. You want to read it? And you're like, obviously I love leadership things. Like I love leadership models. Yes, I want to explore it. And so we were having these conversations just for funsies. And I was like, we should probably hit record on these. But I also think that, right, like it's the podcast, the point of the podcast is not to be a marketing thing, although it'll be that, right? Like, but the purpose of the podcast is, the purpose of conscience-driven leadership is ultimately to provide a way for this kind of leader to recognize themselves and give a name to it. Because the loneliest you can be is feeling like you were alone and making it up as you go along. Like you were just leading the only way you know how. And you read leadership books and you study leadership frameworks and you try and find things that you can use and you find useful bits and pieces in lots of things, right? Like Cowses and Posner were hugely influential on me. And a lot of their work is just like really good leadership advice. And there's lots of really good books. So Cowses and Posner Credibility, that'll be your book of the day for our
There you
book
go.
list.
Add it to the list.
Add it to the list. Right, because credibility is critical to any kind of leadership. And I think it's especially critical to conscience-driven leadership. But that's tactics. Like you do this so that you're more effective. And I think conscience-driven leaders are effective because they care about people and because they feel a responsibility to make the world better in the workplace, whether that's nonprofits or universities or schools or businesses, right? Like you make the world a better place where you live. And conscience-driven leaders make the world a better place where they work. And so I, like, I think the number one reason to create this is to give people a language that allows them to recognize themselves and a set of tools that will make them more effective and sustainable so that they can climb a mountain, climb the leadership mountain that is conscience-driven leadership and encounter that new terrain and have some tools that are multi-purpose, that they can be like, this is something new and scary and I don't know how to do it, but I have this great backpack of tools now that is going to help me move confidently into the unknown.
This reminds me of a phrase that I'm gonna twist into making sense here, which is, the idea that when all of your tools are for leadership, everything looks like a leadership opportunity. uh, and I say this just knowing that when we first started having our conversations around this piece, I was going through chemo and I'm still in radiation
Mm,
now, and that really changed what platform I had for leadership. And
mm,
getting to do this gave me a chance to be thoughtful about leadership in a structured way again when I had lost a lot of structure in my life because chemo meant a lot more downtime and
yeah.
really fun sometimes. So, I thought that spending more time in the medical and the health systems than in my own desk chair would mean that leadership side of me wouldn't be as relevant. I would almost turn that off, but the more I went through the process, the more I realized I needed it more than ever. And
Mm.
being mindful about how intentional leadership changes wherever you show up uh, it just became really apparent to me how important that was. And so, I do think that this is something that helps you get through any of those mountains, whether they're at work, whether they're in your personal life. Um, I think that that's really important. It is a way of life. I mean, you can have that work-life balance and still see yourself in a leader across that, you know, dichotomy we've decided to set up. I don't know that work and life is really that different. I don't know that always helps us to think about them as almost opposing things.
I mean, we're all going to get sick of this quote, but it's because it's so good. But leadership is the part of our life we call work, is something that one of my very first collaborators, somebody who like helped forge how I led, said to me once. And I was like, yes, that's the thing. Like leadership is just, it's part of who we are. We call it work, but we use it everywhere. I would love, do you have an example of how your leadership showed up for you in the chemo experience?
Yeah. Uh, when I had to have a lot more doctor's appointments, of course. And I'll say that one way I got through chemo sessions, which varied how hard they were depending on what drugs I was taking, it was just, it's a thing. But one way I passed the time was just watching how the nurses interacted with each other and
Hmm.
led as a team because chemo nurses are just phenomenal people who figure out how to work with each other so incredibly for the benefit of so many people who are in some of the worst days of their lives. And so, like, first of all, being having that turned on so that I was thoughtful and thinking about things of how do I actually take this and make sure I'm a better leader on the other side of it. Uh, and a lot of that was coming from observing these amazing nurses. On the other side of working with doctors, it was also recognizing that doctors have different leadership styles and ways they're going to work with patients, and me figuring out a way for me to articulate what I need in a doctor.
Yeah.
Of there are going to be so many different priorities you have, and someone that's a really great doctor for one person may not be for another. Because for me,
Uh-huh.
my priorities, I need you to be able to explain the science really well.
Uh-huh.
Big words, but they just don't impress me. I gotta know that you can explain it to me. And then, second, I need to feel known. Like you've looked at
Mhm.
before you walk in the door, that you are very in tune to my case, because I think that being a big part of being a good doctor is being a good listener so that you know
Uh-huh.
what's going on with the patient. And so I had to start thinking about, well, how is this person operating within this system? How are they supporting me as a patient and what I need? Um,
Uh-huh.
Not just, is this a good doctor? Is this not a good doctor? But what are the priorities that I have that are going to help me get through this as a patient and feel really supported? And that's
And
kind
how
of,
do you get that from the doctor you
yeah,
have?
exactly. Or decide when a second opinion is going to be valuable to you, not
Yeah.
because you don't believe in the advice they're giving you, but you need to be able to process it in a
Yeah.
way that allows you to move forward with it.
So it calls
And
boundaries,
yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
having boundaries and navigating boundaries. Yeah.
Mhm. So
Total
that's kind
leadership
of a
quality.
leading up scenario,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
something that came into play for me.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's a fantastic and powerful example.
Thank you.
Well, and like, right, like this is another example. Like it came out and it was ready to reach out to you when at a moment that you were like, oh man, I really need something to sink my teeth into that is lower stakes, but that is distracting in a positive way and
Yeah.
reconnects me to who I was. Like I feel like everybody that I've talked to about it, and I hope that's what's happening to whoever's listening to this podcast right now,
Yeah.
is having this moment of like, oh, wow, this is just what I need to hear right now. And I'm just trusting that that's going to happen. But I had a conversation with somebody yesterday who's like a professional acquaintance. Again, I worked with a little bit many years ago, was referred to me by somebody else who's like, hey, I think you might like this. And we had this just like incredibly fruitful. She's like, wow, there's so much that resonates in this. And she got it. She asked great questions. And it just was like, oh, this was like an energizing conversation for her. And so feel like we have really energizing conversations. And I was like, other people should get to hear our awesome, energizing conversations about this really cool thing that we're both excited about.
Yeah.
So
Oh, absolutely. Well, I'm excited for it. Is there anything else you would share just about the structure of the podcast, what people can expect? What more do you think is valuable for people to know as they join us on this podcast journey that we're on?
that is a great question. What is important for people to know about the podcast? We're going to try and just be really honest and authentically ourselves, right? Like we don't have a plan. Be advised. We are flying without a net. We have ideas of things we want to talk about, but we're letting we're letting the wind blow us where it wants to, right? Like I operate on that philosophy, right? Like I feel like I'm Mary Poppins. Throughout my life, I have opened the umbrella and let the wind blow me where I'm supposed to be. And right now, the wind blew me to conscience-driven leadership. And hopefully it's blowing me and conscience-driven leadership to the people who need to know about it, because you need a community. And like ultimately, I think we're trying to build a community of people who need connection with other people like them so that we can support each other and we can grow this idea of conscience-driven leadership in the world. Like, I think the world needs this. I don't think that is really a surprise to anybody that once they think about it. I hope that it lands as like, well, obviously, conscience is what's missing. Let's add that. Let's find the leaders who have this experience and intuition and drive and figure out how to support them and grow them into bigger places because, yeah, my hope is that it's my drop in the bucket, and we can all be drops in the bucket of making the world a little bit kinder and more people oriented in our systems and our leadership.
I feel like we're kind of coming to a last question here that I think would be an important one to wrap with, which is you mentioned that this is a hard world right now for CDL leaders, that it's not always welcome and it's not always celebrated right now. Um, so, can you give the CDL leaders listening a little bit of a pep talk? What would you say to them right now if they're feeling that pressure or that weight, or that they might be a little bit out of step, but they know that they're in the right step, but they just having trouble with that dissonance? What would you say to them?
To the conscience-driven leader who is feeling overwhelmed by the state of the world, I would say that you're not alone. You're not crazy. Whatever anybody is telling you about your leadership style, you are not crazy. And you can do this, and it's okay if you need help doing this. And there are other people out there who understand how to lead like you do. And hopefully we're going to help you find those people. The world is hard, right? Like I'm a big believer in Rebecca Solnit's definition of hope, that, right? Like hope is an action verb. Hope is a thing you do. You believe that better is possible, and you take action to make better possible. It's not just optimism. It's not just like everything will work out, but it's also not pessimism. It's not deciding in advance that nothing can work out. So I think conscience-driven leadership, there's a lot in the tools of this that's about what's the smallest step that you can take? What's the thing you have control over? Maybe that's only you, right? One of the hardest things to be in life, one of the hardest things to be is a conscience-driven leader in a culture that does not value conscience. And a lot of people, I think, find themselves in those environments, and that's okay. Is there one other conscience-driven leader, right? We recognize each other when we meet. It's obvious. You know, you feel that energy. What's one other conscience-driven leader you know? How do you connect with them? Because we're stronger in connection. And you may or may not be able to change the culture you're in, right? Like, power is subjective and privilege has a lot to do with it. And deciding whether where you are is somewhere where you can build a habitat that sustains you enough and supports you enough is an important question. And if the answer is no, then maybe look for a culture where you can. One of my metaphors for this is it's like you're a plant, right? Like, if you're a cactus, because Julie's in Tucson and I lived in Tucson for a long time, cactuses are awesome. Cactuses don't do great in Maine. It's not the cactus's fault if it doesn't survive well in Maine. It's Maine's fault, if anything. And so if you're a cactus in Maine, how do you get yourself a heat lamp? Right? Like, what's the heat lamp? How do you make it a little bit better so that you can have a little bit more energy so that you can take another action and impact another person? So just one little thing at a time. What's the thing you can do that makes it feel a little more possible?
That's wonderful. Something I'd add is I think in this world right now, there is a lot of chatter. There's a lot of information coming at us all the time. And throughout my career, I've been in spaces where I've supported internship programs, worked with people who are early career. And something I realized in my experiences and that I pass on to a lot of people is one really important thing to learn is what advice to take and what advice is not for you. There is a lot of, either now see here, or this is how it's been, or this is how it works, or I'm telling you this because it's for your own good, or this is how I need you to see things. And it's very easy to get stuck in that or to want to value that because you value mentorship and you care for the people that are telling you these things and you care about getting to a place where you can make a difference. But just because someone has told you something doesn't mean it's advice for you. And inherent is that you yourself have a lot of knowledge and are an incredible person that can be that moment of discernment of this thing, yes, I can take this and run with it. This thing feels off and I need to roll it around in my brain a little bit more to decide
Mhm.
if I'm spitting it out or if I'm keeping it in. And that's
Yeah.
okay. Not every piece
Yeah.
of advice is intended for you to just go out and act on, and that's okay. And it doesn't mean that there is something wrong with you when all of these pieces don't fit. To your point about the cactus in Maine, I want to put that out there too because it's something that I feel like I learned and had to be thoughtful about too.
And I think that ties back into what we talked about in our last episode a lot around intuition, right? You have knowledge, that you have pattern recognition ability. If you are identifying as a conscience-driven leader, there's a part of your brain that is well-informed and making decisions faster than you can think to tell you yes or no, stop or go. And so if you get advice and it lands with a hard no, it's okay to ignore that. One of the first pieces of advice I got when I moved into leadership, the president of the company was not my dad, it was somebody else. And he used to tell me all the time, Hannah, you want to be a leader? You got to have a black heart. And I would just argue with him and be like, absolutely not. I disagree. If that's what it takes, then I will never be successful because that is impossible for me. And I honestly think that a lot of my ideas about leadership and my drive to figure out how to how to lead was about proving him wrong. Like, I was like, that's untrue. I choose to find a way to lead where that is heart-centered and heartful and that cares about people. And if you can't tell me how to do it and you tell me that it's wrong, bite me. I'm gonna go figure it out myself. And so
Love
you
it.
don't have to, I don't recommend saying bite me to your boss. I don't think I actually said that to him. I did tell him he was wrong, but again, I was the boss's kid, so I had a lot of privilege and I could afford to be like, you're wrong and I'm not gonna listen to you. Bye. But I also, right, I also would redo the budget and improve the bottom line. Like, I also gave him what he really needed. You know, an opinion is one thing, a requirement is different. So what's the requirement and what's the opinion? And you can separate those two. He needed a budget. He needed my salaries to come in under budget. I figured out how to make that happen and keep my show good. And the fact that I did it a different way than he would have done it was irrelevant because ultimately what he cared about was the numbers.
Amazing.
All righty. Well, this has been super fun. I think we probably like is a nice little stopping point. So if somebody's telling you to have a black heart, you can know that they're wrong. And if you feel like making the world a better place is for you and you want to do that in the workplace, conscience-driven leadership is for you. And yeah, this has been Inside Conscience-Driven Leadership. I want to give a quick shout out to our amazing podcast producer, Anna Miller, who is not me. She's got no H in her name. It's my favorite thing to say. And to my wonderful co-host, Julie Euber.
Thank you so much.
And signing off, I'm Hanna Miller. If you had thoughts or feelings about today's podcast and you want to share them with us, hit us up at podcast@conscience-drivenleadership.com or visit our website, conscience-drivenleadership.com, for more information and tools and resources about how you can be more effective and more sustained in your conscience-driven leadership. And we hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye.